Greetings, dear ones. I'm Kryon of Magnetic Service. Have you noticed a theme between channelers? No matter what the teaching is, there's always love. And the channeler will represent whatever entity, whatever force, whatever beautiful thing. From the other side of the veil, whatever energy. And they will always say that they love you. This is the staple, dear ones, of knowing that you are listening to messages that are accurate and true, pure, benevolent, that there is great love for you from that source which you call the Creator. There are things that you do not understand that would be eye-rolling to so many. And they come with that which you call the creation story. The creation story of the planet is one of the most loving stories that can be told. If you saw it the right way, if you knew what really happened, over a period of time, how humans were given free choice and actually implanted with a soul. The soul that they were implanted with is different from a soul perhaps of an animal. It's a soul that is allied with the Creator. It's a soul that can advance itself and eventually evolve to be even ascended. It's different. It's beautiful. Not all life forms in this galaxy have that ability. This one does. And in that soul implantation, in that time when you were given the 23 pairs of chromosomes instead of 24 that all the other animals have, in that time, there was other things that took place. And this is not always given to you. But today I want to remind you of it because we are on a subject that talks about the elements of the spark. And if this is the first time you've heard that, it is the associated energies that go along with an expanded realization. An expanded realization of God inside. What would those be? At the same time, dear ones, that the creation story was happening on this planet 200,000 years ago, you have to understand that other things also had to occur. How is it that this planet is so responsive to you? What about all those grids you've heard about? Some invisible, some are scientific, and some are metaphysical. What about those? You might say, did they all exist before the creation story? And the answer is no. We have told you before that some were baked into the planet. That means to say they grew with the planet. And some did not. Some were given to you later. And I want to talk about one in particular. The one that is an attribute of the spark, that is to say, that belongs to an awakening human being. It's the one that was seen by the indigenous first. And it's called the Gaia grid. Perhaps the Gaia grid is the most misunderstood one. When you talk about the grids of the planet, there's always the most popular, the magnetic and the crystalline, but the Gaia, what is it? What kind of energies are there? I want you to take a look at this for a moment in a sacred way. Because implanted into the planet was the partnership that you would require to live here. And that partnership is a partnering with sacredness. Any indigenous listening to this right now will know exactly where I'm going. In the past, dear ones, before civilization became more modern as it is today before your cities, for thousands of years, those who lived on the planet, who understood who they were, who saw the Creator in all things, all of those would say there is no difference between the stars, the dirt of the earth, and the trees, and the souls of humanity. That they were all allied in such a way that one could not possibly exist without the other. And that is why in all of the indigenous stories, in their chants and their songs, they relate to Gaia. Those energies of the planet, and there are so many of them, that were created as partners for you. There is so much in the Gaia grid that is filled with life. Life that is multidimensional, dear ones, not the animals. The animals like you live upon the planet and enjoy the grid, but they were also here before it was placed. What I'm telling you, there is even a multidimensional life beyond yours, beyond that which is your soul, that is baked in, if you would say, to the Gaia grid that was put here carefully during those years when humanity was given the creation, was given the 23 pairs of chromosomes, was given free choice, and had its very soul altered to be sacred. All part of that which you would call the setup. Today, in this, a modern place, you would think the Gaia grid has been sublimated. That is to say, it's less than. Now you don't need it as much. And that is a perception. That's a perception based upon your schedules, your lives, what you've been told is important, and also, of course, those organizations that are spiritual in your civilization that don't even talk about it. I'm going to give you another name for the Gaia grid, which will confuse you. I'm going to also call it the ancestor grid. Because also within the indigenous ideas of what the earth meant to them and the energies of survival were also part of their ancestral acknowledgement. Almost every indigenous on the planet turns to their ancestors as one of the most important sources of intuition and wisdom and help that any human could have. Now let me ask you, enlightened one who sits here or listens, tell me all about your ancestors. And you're going to draw a blank. Unless you have an indigenous lineage, you're going to draw a blank. Where has that gone? What has happened to the Gaia grid? What is the ancestor grid anymore? And so let's start to look at this and tell you it is alive and well, and it is precious, and it is beautiful, and it's still your partner. And you have ancestors. But we're going to call the ancestors a little differently than the lineage of your heredity. And we'll do it in a moment. But let's talk about that which is the Gaia energy. I've told you before that my partner is not sensitive to outside energies. He could not be and still channel me. He has to be focused on the energy that he understands. There are no distractions. There are no distractions from any other place for him. This is where he belongs, sitting in a chair, focused, so that the purity and the truth of these messages can ring true. And yet, we let him see something so he would understand part of what his teaching was about. We've said this before, for he was in a place called Tasmania, in one of those awesome rainforest areas where everything is a green that goes beyond green, where the oxygen is rich, and where you feel like you are born yet that morning. It is so special as you walk and you watch the forest. And in that place, he saw that which you would call a diva. And you can call it whatever you want to, and you can give it names, but this is multidimensional life in Gaia. It's the life force of the forest, of the plants, of the dirt, of the trees, of the air. And quite often it will come together in a confluence of energies and show itself in all of its light and beauty and color. And those who are sensitive can almost call it to them and see it, just like the indigenous could. They were so used to the lights, and they were so used to that, which is the life force of Gaia. No wonder it became their partner and their friend, because they saw it almost daily. He got to see it. In a fleeting way, it never stood still. But he knew what he was seeing, and he didn't want to leave. It's the only time we showed him this. An allowance for him to move out of the box that he was in. He has not seen it since. All of this so he can give these messages that say the Gaia grid is filled with a partnership for you, and it's alive. The Gaia grid isn't just Mother Nature. It is not just Pachamama. It is a living grid that is partnering with you and for you and calls to you even now. It is the ancestor grid that is also filled then with the ancestral energies of wisdom. We told you long ago about soul splitting. It's confusing, dear ones. But let's simplify it. When you leave this planet, a piece of you stays. And it stays in several places, and one of them is the Gaia grid. That's the ancestral part of the Gaia grid. And the indigenous knew this and felt it and called upon their ancestors in the same way they would call upon the energies of the grid, of the nature that they lived within. For their roof was the sky, and their walls were the mountains. And it was far easier for them to see the connection and work with the connection. Far easier than you can today. You're not even told about the connection. You're not even told about the connection in the most sacred places you visit, that you call your organizations which are spiritual. Almost none of them even acknowledge that it's there. So perhaps it's time to start a process of awareness. And here is the teaching. Dear one, in the modern civilization, we're not asking you to change your lifestyle or become impractical or any of these things. We're asking you to take time to acknowledge this life grid. Some of you are able to get away into the forests, into the areas which are so beautiful, with the lakes and the trees and sit for a moment or two and soak in the life force of your partner. Some of you can, some of you can't. And for those who cannot, it is still there. Even though you may not be able to hug the tree, you can ask the tree to hug you. For the Gaia grid knows your name. It is your partner on this planet. It helps you to exist. It works with the crystalline grid, the magnetic grid, all of those for your life force as well. You can sit even in the middle of the city and surround yourself as though you could see the stars like the ancestors could, and the mountains so pristine like they could. You can imagine yourself in the lake, in the river. And in that imagination and in that intuition, it will come to you in such a way, as it does with the indigenous who have the same issues of living in a modern society and can't get away. They'll create their Gaia as they walk around. Ask them how they do it. It never leaves their consciousness. And we're asking you to include it in yours, to make it a staple of your meditation. The ancestors, oh, this gets good. So many of you in the societies of today, in the amalgamation of heredity, have no pure lineage any longer. And it's difficult for you then to call upon the ancestors, even though there would be perhaps a few in that soup we call the Gaia grid. Instead, I'm going to remind you of something. You have a lineage which we're going to call Akashic. How many lives have you lived on the planet? I am sitting in front of an elite group of old souls, and I will tell you, some of you number into the thousands. You carry these lifetime existences with you in your Akash. The earth knows them, you know them, and the energies of all of them have imprinted themselves on the Gaia grid and on the crystalline grid. Pieces and parts of all of them are still here. Dear ones, that is your ancestry. If you don't have a pure ancestry, that's the one to pull upon. The ones that shared your soul over and over and over have pieces and parts of them still here. Is that too strange for you? That means you can call upon the wisdom of you, having lived lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, learned and learned and learned. And you did it in the same time frame as the ancestors of the old, of the indigenous. You're not any younger than they are. But you don't have that chemistry that is pure, but you have the Akashic, which is. There are your ancestors. I'm hearing some of them now. Some of them play the banjo, I believe. And so I've just explained in this teaching section, you can claim this grid, you can claim the aliveness of it. You can call upon it just like the ancestors did. Because in this energy, all these things are available to you. The lineage of your ancestors is you in your Akash. All of these things are available just like they were to the indigenous. You didn't lose them. You're just not aware. We'll speak more of this. But I wanted to give you the information that is so beautiful, that is missing on the planet today in so many cultures. That's an element of the awakening, of the spark, to relearn and revisit your partner Gaia and an ancestry that you've never thought as helpers. And they are. All part of new paradigms that you're beginning to learn. And so it is.
Greetings, dear ones. I am Kryon of Magnetic Service.
Indeed, I know who is watching, who is listening. There are those who would wonder about channeling. How removed is the entity you are channeling from the planet's difficulties? How removed from everyday life of everyday human? It's a good question. For there has been training for years and years that would say that if you're going to be a spiritual person, and if you're going to ally yourself with that which you believe is spirit or God or the other side of the veil, you're talking to that energy, that creative source, which doesn't really have much to do with you. That's the training. That God is over there and you're over here. Well, the things on the other side of the veil where they're in this very special place that have nothing to do with the planet. Oh, if you knew. But let me just tell you this. You are so well known. I want you to remember something. Each of you has what is called a soul, and you know this. No matter what spiritual system you belong to, there's a soul. There's an idea that there is more to you than just the human body. And if you were defining a soul, there would be many definitions because it's not really something definable. Not definable in the dimensionality that you live in. You would have to have a multidimensional language, a perception, a knowing, in order to fully see what the soul was. If you could see what it was, it would take your breath away. It truly would. You are a magnificent being, and that includes an eternal soul. It sits upon that which is the three-dimensional body in a way that you're not even aware of. Some believe a soul is got to be somewhere else, and that you leave and you come to the planet and you exist and then you go back to the soul. Oh no. You ride in that soul. Part of that riding, the word that's even used, the vehicle, the Merkaba or Merkaba, is part of this experience, a multidimensionality that is beyond anything you can think about. Remarkable it is, and the reason I'm telling you is because for the first time in this new energy, you are starting to use pieces and parts of it that you never did before. The first remarkable thing that you should know that is current for your time is that you're actually here, that you made it past the predictions of doom. These predictions, by the way, were given to you by the ancients of your land, the ancients of many lands in the northern hemisphere as well, who said that when they watch the stars, they see cycles. And the cycles correspond to human consciousness. And so many of them have made predictions based upon the cycles. The most well-known in the northern hemisphere are the Maya. But there are more than that say the same thing. When you take a look at your Western scriptures, almost all of them told you about the cycle. And they pinpointed certain dates, an average always, centered around the year 2000. And they said you probably would not make it. What we have told you before and what you don't know is there have been other civilizations before you on this planet who also had their cycles. The cycles always based upon the stars. And they didn't make it. Or they almost didn't make it and then generated another civilization. Kryon, you talk in puzzles. I'm telling you this, dear ones. You think that you are the only civilization, that you started 5,000 years ago. That's not accurate. Put a few zeros on it and come to that which is 50,000, 40,000. That's how long humanity has been here, going through cycles that you don't even know about. The end of the current one, predicted in the year 2000, said you wouldn't be here. Go find your scriptures and you'll see. The chapters that talk about the end times, they give metaphors of the end, where the eagle and the bear would come together and nothing would be left. They speak of world wars. They speak of you not existing. And you're here. The first remarkable thing that is so current is that you made it. And if you don't think that's remarkable, go study the scriptures. And you will find that there really was no predictions past the year 2000 of what you were going to do, because you were not expected to be here. Go read even those predictions of Nostradamus and some others, and you will find that not much is happening to you in those scriptures and quatrains past 2012. Remarkably, something took place. Remarkably, it took place in that space of time, which was called the precession of the equinoxes. It's a 36-year window, note divisible by 12, that is a special window of time and allowance and consciousness that even the ancients predicted. And in that time frame, this planet started to shift and change. This is when the Soviet Union ceased to exist. It's when the Berlin Wall fell down almost overnight by itself. I arrived in 1989. The same time all of this was happening, because the marker was set. You were going to stay. There would be no Third World War. There would be no Armageddon, as you were told. And you would start another kind of existence, and we labeled it. A few years ago, we told you past 2012, if you should make it, you would have the new normal. That particular phrase has now been picked up even by your media. The new normal is here. And that new normal is what I'm going to talk about in the remarkable things. And yes, I will talk about COVID, dear ones, a little later. But right now, the most remarkable thing is this, is that humanity went through this cycle. And it wasn't really predicted you would. Some of you know of what I speak. There are those who still say you're going to terminate because you didn't at the right time, the time allotted for it. They say, well, it's just later. It's coming. You wait and see. So those who will then predict your demise are expecting it. What do you think that does to a psyche, a human body, a consciousness, when they don't think they're going to make it? Or they don't think their families are going to make it? You know who they are. You've seen them. I want to tell you something that is absolutely stellar and remarkable. Your magnificence is starting to show. The things that the ancients have talked about, and the gurus and the lamas, are absolutely correct. That consciousness and love and compassion are going to start showing. And that these will be part of the new normal in ways you have never seen before. And they're going to shock you because they're going to happen in areas of your own civilization that you don't expect them to. I've given many channels about what to expect in the new normal. Over and over, I've told you. The people will start acting differently because the expectations are starting to rise. The expectations, expecting what? Expecting government will start working in a sensible way. That's not something that any civilization expects, dear ones. You're not alone in that. Everyone expects that government will have some form of dysfunction, of corruption, of greed. What if that starts to change? What if clearer heads prevail? And what you start seeing is benevolence and caring and laws starting to be passed for those that are different than before because they're starting to care more or see things clearer than they did before. The first place you may see it is how candidates actually will campaign. We have told you this before. In your country, in my partner's country, there will be those who will campaign on love. And I will tell you, they will not criticize their opponent. They will congratulate their opponent. They will build up their component and they'll say, but I have a different idea. Listen, this is where we differ. And you will say, that's not going to work. Because you'll say, that's not the way politics works. Kryon, you have to understand who we are here on the planet. I'll tell you, I understand who you are. And when you see it, the first time, I will tell you, those candidates probably won't win. But they're starting to garner something you didn't expect. Support for the attitude. An expectation that the good guys are out there and they might actually have good ideas. More than that, they'll campaign on benevolence and magnificence instead of just the other way around. I've just given you worst case scenario politics so that you'll understand a new normal could be this way. I have more to talk about on that one in the next 3. The things you don't expect that might actually start to come to fruition. Corporations who care. Government that actually starts to care. Because it starts to have those infiltrating in important places that are part of the new normal, that have a higher consciousness, that some of the young people are starting to demand. And as you start to see this, there will be an overwhelming idea you want more. Instead of, isn't that interesting, that'll never work, you're going to go, oh my, what if, what if? And that is what's going to start to come about. Kryon, how soon? How long will it take? That's up to you. But right now, we are congratulating you for surviving. That prediction of a world war, that prediction of an Armageddon, none of that took place, dear ones, and it won't. Well, how does that all fit in with the COVID? I'll get there. This is the beginning of a cycle that the indigenous have expected. This is not a surprise. Many of the indigenous will say this is the beginning of the big cycle, the end of a 26,000-year cycle and the beginning of another one. And these cycles, the big ones, carry the most impact on, are you ready? Consciousness. It also impacts weather. You're seeing that, dear Australian. It impacts all manner of things around you, this cycle. All of these things are fearful to those who do not understand. Perhaps it's time. I want you to think about something. If the indigenous knew they were coming, if the indigenous predicted them, what's to fear? Because the indigenous are saying that this is potentially the highest consciousness that humanity has ever seen around the corner. Coming at you in ways you don't expect, starting to clean up the dirt. The establishment of the nodes and the nulls on the planet. There is definitely intervention from the other side of the veil to push you forward now that you've given intent for this kind of new consciousness. That's remarkable, and that's current, and that's happening now. I want this channel to give you hope for your land, for other lands, for this planet. It's not going in this direction you think just because this has never happened before in this way, or you're feeling odd or different, or especially those of you who perhaps are spiritual based and starting to feel a multidimensional pull. You're starting to see it. Things are going to change, aren't they? Indeed they are. Remarkable. That's the first remarkable thing, that you made it, and that you're starting to see some things that we told you about. I arrived in 1989 for this reason, to start to show you and tell you, you don't know what you don't know, dear ones. There are things coming that are not negative, that will shock and surprise you because they make sense, because they're not dysfunctional, because perhaps you can see the benevolence and the love of the Creator in places you never thought you'd see it. These are better times than you think. Hard for you to believe as you sit there now. Light is coming. And so it is.